Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your neighbor, the quiet one who struggled to pay bills, just won the lottery. Not a small prize, but hundreds of billions of dollars. Overnight, they're buying mansions, luxury cars are lining their driveway, and everyone's talking about their incredible fortune. You'd be happy for them, right? But deep down, you'd also be asking yourself some questions. Will they manage it wisely? Will it change them? And most importantly, what can I learn from watching what happens next? That's exactly the situation playing out right now in the Caribbean. And if you're Jamaican, you need to pay very close attention to what's unfolding in Guyana, because what happens there over the next few years won't just affect them. It's going to send shockwaves through our entire region, reshape Caribbean economics, and possibly rewrite the rules of how we think about prosperity in the islands we call home. Guyana wasn't supposed to be the story we're watching today. For decades, this South American nation, culturally and politically tied to the Caribbean through CARICOM, was known for three things: struggling economy, mass migration, and unfulfilled potential. People left Guyana searching for opportunities they couldn't find at home. The brain drain was real, the poverty was grinding, and the future looked dim. In a region where even the poorest islands had their own identity and tourism appeal, Guyana was the forgotten neighbor, the one nobody talked about at regional summits, the country that seemed destined to remain in the shadows forever. But then 2015 happened, and everything changed. Picture this: a massive drilling ship floating 120 miles off Guyana's coast, cutting through thousands of feet of ocean and rock. The crew is tense, hopeful, but realistic. They've drilled dry wells before. They know the odds. But when the drill finally breaks through into the reservoir and the data starts flooding in, the room goes silent. Then someone whispers the words that would change a nation's destiny forever. We've hit it, and it's massive. The Stabroek Block discovery wasn't just another oil find. It was a geological monster. ExxonMobil and its partners had stumbled upon one of the largest oil discoveries of the 21st century. We're talking billions of barrels, enough to transform Guyana from an economic afterthought into a global energy player. The kind of discovery that makes veteran oil executives lose their composure. The kind that makes governments salivate and investors abandon their spreadsheets to book the next flight to Georgetown. But here's where the story takes a turn that should make every Jamaican sit up and take notice. Because this isn't just a story about oil. It's a story about choices, about whether sudden wealth becomes a blessing or a curse, about whether a Caribbean nation can break the pattern that's destroyed so many resource-rich countries before it. Let me paint you a picture of just how dramatic this transformation has been. In 2019, Guyana was producing a modest 15,000 barrels of oil per day. Respectable, but nothing to write home about. Fast forward to 2024, just 5 years later, and they're pumping out 630,000 barrels per day. That's not growth, that's an explosion. A 4,100% increase in half a decade. And the projections? They're predicting 1.3 million barrels per day by 2027. To put that in perspective, that would make tiny Guyana, with less than 800,000 people, one of the top 20 oil producers on planet Earth, competing with nations that have 10 times, 50 times, even 100 times their population. The economic numbers are so staggering they almost don't seem real. In 2020, while the rest of the world was collapsing under the weight of a global pandemic, while Caribbean tourism was dying and economies were shrinking, Guyana's GDP grew by 43.5%. 43.5% in 1 year during a pandemic. Let that sink in for a moment. The following year, 2021, another 20% growth. Then 2022 arrived, and Guyana recorded 62.3% GDP growth, the highest in the entire world. Not in the Caribbean, not in the Americas, in the entire world. In 2023, another 38.4%. In 2024, 34%. This isn't economic growth, This is economic metamorphosis. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something important. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I think you are, if you're starting to realize why every Jamaican, every Caribbean person needs to understand what's happening in Guyana, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers, and we can't do it without you. This channel is dedicated to bringing you the stories that matter, the analysis that goes deeper, the conversations that shape our region's future. And after you subscribe, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Are you optimistic about Guyana's future? Are you worried? Do you think Jamaica should be pursuing oil exploration more aggressively? Or are we better off on our current path? I read every single comment, and your perspectives make this community richer. Now, let's get back to this incredible story. The money flowing into Guyana isn't just impressive on paper. It's reshaping every aspect of their economy in real time. Their export earnings tell a story that's both thrilling and terrifying. In 2023 alone, Guyana earned $17.4 billion from exports. Let me repeat that, $17.4 billion. For context, that's nearly double Jamaica's entire GDP. And here's the kicker. $13.4 billion of those dollars came from crude petroleum alone. Oil now represents 88% of everything Guyana sells to the world. 88%. That's not diversification. That's concentration on a scale that would make any economist nervous. Then there's Guyana's Natural Resource Fund, their sovereign wealth vault, the piggy bank where all this oil money is supposed to be saved for future generations. Right now, it holds over 758 billion Guyanese dollars, more than 2.6 billion US dollars, and it's growing every single day. This year alone, oil revenue is expected to contribute about 37% of the country's entire national budget. Think about that. More than 1/3 of everything the government spends comes from oil. That's extraordinary power, but it's also extraordinary vulnerability. And the investors, they're circling like sharks who have smelled blood in the water. Foreign direct investment into Guyana jumped 60.5% in 2019, the moment oil production began. By 2023, Guyana had attracted over $7.1 billion in foreign direct investment, making it the sixth largest recipient in all of Latin America and the Caribbean. ExxonMobil alone has invested $30 billion into Guyana's oil sector. $30 billion. That's more than 3 times Jamaica's entire GDP, invested in a country with fewer people than the parish of Kingston and St. Andrew. But here's where we need to pause and ask the uncomfortable questions. The ones that don't make it into the glossy investment brochures and government press releases. Because if there's one thing history has taught us about oil wealth, it's that the story almost never ends well. You want to know what keeps me up at night when I think about Guyana? It's not the numbers, as impressive as they are. It's the pattern. Because we've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. Nigeria discovered oil in the 1950s and became one of Africa's wealthiest nations on paper. Today, despite pumping nearly 2 million barrels per day, most Nigerians live in poverty. Corruption is rampant. And the Niger Delta, where all that oil comes from, is an environmental disaster zone. Venezuela, once the richest country in South America thanks to its oil, is now in complete economic collapse, with hyperinflation, mass starvation, and millions fleeing as refugees. Equatorial Guinea struck oil in the 1990s and briefly had one of the highest GDPs per capita in Africa. The result? One of the world's most corrupt governments, a dictator who's been in power for over 4 decades, and ordinary citizens who see almost none of the wealth. This pattern has a name, the resource curse. It's the paradox where countries with abundant natural resources often end up poorer, more corrupt, and more unstable than countries with no resources at all. The mechanism is brutally simple. When wealth comes from extracting something from the ground rather than from the productive work of your citizens, Governments stop serving their people and start serving the resource. Democracy weakens because the government doesn't need to tax citizens, so citizens lose their power to demand accountability. Corruption explodes because there's so much money concentrated in so few hands. The economy becomes dangerously dependent on commodity prices that swing wildly based on global markets you can't control. And perhaps worst of all, the easy money discourages investment in education, innovation, and the hard work of building real, sustainable industries. So the question isn't whether Guyana has struck it rich. That's obvious. The question is whether they can break the curse that's destroyed so many countries before them. And right now, the warning signs are flashing red. Let's start with the most basic measure of a country's success. Are the people actually better off? In 2021, youth unemployment in Guyana stood at 29.9%. Nearly 1 in 3 young Guyanese couldn't find work, even as billions of dollars flowed into the country. That number should shock you. It should make you wonder where all that money is actually going. Because if oil wealth isn't creating jobs for young people, if it isn't building a future for the next generation, then what exactly is it doing? The poverty numbers are equally troubling. Despite being one of the fastest growing economies in human history, significant portions of Guyana's population still lack access to clean water, reliable electricity, and quality health care. Georgetown, the capital, has better infrastructure now, but venture into the interior regions, the areas where many indigenous Guyanese live, and you'll find communities that look like the oil boom never happened at all. The wealth is there, but it's not trickling down. It's pooling at the top, accumulating in the hands of a connected few while the majority watches from the outside. Political tensions are rising too. Guyana has a complex ethnic makeup, with large populations of Indian and African descent, indigenous peoples, and mixed communities. Historically, these divisions have been exploited by politicians for electoral gain. Now, add billions of dollars of oil money into that volatile mix, and you have a recipe for conflict. There are already allegations of corruption, of contracts awarded to political allies, of decisions made behind closed doors that should be transparent. The 2020 elections were marred by controversy, with accusations of fraud and international intervention required to resolve the crisis. This is not the profile of a stable petrostate. This is the profile of a country walking a tightrope, and the fall could be catastrophic. Then there's the environmental angle, and this is where the story becomes truly heartbreaking. Guyana is home to one of the world's most pristine rainforests. Over 80% of the country is covered in jungle, an ecological treasure that stores massive amounts of carbon, provides habitat for countless species, and serves as a critical buffer against climate change. For years, Guyana marketed itself as a green nation, a place where nature and development could coexist. They even received international payments for forest conservation, recognition of their role as environmental stewards. But oil changes everything. The carbon emissions from Guyana's oil production are staggering. Gas flaring alone, the practice of burning off natural gas at drilling sites, could release 25 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every single year. That's the equivalent of adding 5 million cars to the road. For a country that once prided itself on being carbon negative, that's not just ironic, it's tragic. And the environmental risks don't stop at emissions. Oil spills, pipeline leaks, coastal erosion from offshore drilling, the destruction of marine ecosystems. These are all real threats that Guyana is now facing. Here's what makes it even worse. Some of the contracts Guyana signed with oil companies reportedly limit the government's ability to regulate environmental protections or intervene if ecological damage occurs. Imagine that. Your country discovers oil. You're desperate for development. So you sign agreements that tie your hands when the environment you've protected for generations starts getting destroyed. It's sovereignty sold for short-term gain, and the price might be paid for centuries. But let's zoom out for a moment, because there's a larger economic danger lurking beneath all these specific concerns, and it's one that should terrify anyone who understands how markets work. Oil prices are volatile, wildly, destructively volatile. In 2014, oil was over $100 per barrel. By 2016, it had crashed to $26. In 2020, during the pandemic, prices briefly went negative, meaning producers were paying people to take their oil. By 2022, prices had surged back over $100, and now they're somewhere in between, fluctuating based on geopolitics, OPEC decisions, global demand, technological changes, and 1,000 other factors that Guyana has absolutely no control over. Here's the terrifying math. If Guyana's government budget depends on oil for 37% of its revenue, what happens when oil prices crash? What happens when the world accelerates its transition to renewable energy and demand starts falling? What happens if a new oil discovery elsewhere floods the market? The answer is economic catastrophe. Budget cuts, debt defaults, social unrest, all the nightmares that come when a country builds its entire economy on an unstable foundation. The smart move, the move that every economist and policy expert recommends, is diversification. Use the oil wealth while it lasts to build other industries: agriculture, manufacturing, technology, tourism, education. Invest in infrastructure that will serve the economy for decades after the oil runs out. Create a skilled workforce that can compete globally in multiple sectors. Build institutions that are strong, transparent, and resilient. That's the playbook for turning resource wealth into lasting prosperity. But diversification is hard. It requires discipline, long-term thinking, and political courage to invest in things that won't pay off until after the next election. It means saying no to easy spending and yes to delayed gratification. And history suggests that most countries, when faced with that choice, take the easy money and worry about tomorrow when tomorrow comes. The question is, will Guyana be different? There are some reasons for hope. The Guyanese people I've spoken with, the ones following this story, they're not naive. They've seen what happened to Venezuela just next door. They've watched Trinidad and Tobago struggle to manage their oil wealth effectively. They know the risks. There's a growing civil society movement in Guyana demanding transparency, accountability, and equitable distribution of oil revenues. There are young Guyanese coming home from abroad, bringing skills and ideas, determined to help their country navigate this challenge. There are proposals for investing heavily in education and healthcare, for using oil money to build solar and wind capacity, so the country doesn't become dependent on its own fossil fuels, for creating a tech sector that can thrive long after the last barrel is pumped. But good intentions aren't enough. The gravitational pull of easy oil money is immense. It corrupts institutions, distorts priorities, and creates powerful interests that will fight to maintain the status quo. Breaking free of that requires not just good plans, but relentless execution, political stability, and a bit of luck. And this brings us back to Jamaica. Why should we care? Why does what happens in Guyana matter to us? Because we're watching two different models of Caribbean development play out in real time. Guyana has struck the lottery, the sudden windfall, the explosive growth powered by a non-renewable resource. Jamaica has had to do it the hard way, grinding through painful reforms, restructuring debt, building tourism and services, investing in bauxite and agriculture, slowly and steadily constructing an economy without the benefit of an oil jackpot. We've had to learn discipline because we had no choice. We've had to diversify because we had no single golden goose to rely on. We've had to build strong institutions and maintain democratic stability because chaos would destroy the little progress we've made. For decades, that felt like a disadvantage. Why shouldn't we have oil? Why shouldn't we have the easy path? But now, watching Guyana, we're seeing the other side of that coin. We're seeing that the easy path might actually be the dangerous one. We're seeing that the hard-earned stability, the diversified economy, the culture of careful management, those might be Jamaica's greatest assets. Jamaica's economy isn't growing at 60% per year, but it's not going to shrink by 60% either when global conditions change. Jamaica isn't attracting $30 billion in investment from a single oil company, but we're also not dependent on that company's decisions for our survival. Jamaica's government budget isn't flush with oil money, but it's also not going to collapse when oil prices crash or the wells run dry. There's a Jamaican proverb, "Cock mouth kill cock." It means that boasting and carelessness lead to downfall. Right now, Guyana has every reason to boast. The numbers are incredible, but the real test isn't the boom, it's what comes after. It's whether they can resist the temptations that have destroyed every other country in their position. It's whether they can build something lasting from this temporary wealth. And for Jamaica, the lesson isn't that we should go searching desperately for our own oil. The lesson is that we should stay focused on what we've been building. A resilient, diversified economy that doesn't depend on any single commodity. A democratic system that, despite its flaws, remains accountable to citizens. And a culture of entrepreneurship and hustle that creates value from human potential rather than from what happens to be buried underground. Guyana's story is still being written. The next 5 years will tell us whether they become the Caribbean success story we all hope for, or another cautionary tale in the long history of the resource curse. But whatever happens there, it will teach us invaluable lessons about wealth, about governance, about sustainability, and about what it really means to prosper. The oil boom in Guyana is the most dramatic economic story in Caribbean history, but the outcome is far from certain. And that's why every Jamaican should be watching closely. Not with envy, not with judgment, but with the understanding that their choices and their fate will shape possibilities and define limits for our entire region. In our next exploration, we'll turn the spotlight fully on Jamaica. No oil, no mega boom, but what we do have is something that might prove more valuable in the long run. A different kind of power, the quiet, disciplined kind that's often overlooked but rarely fails. We'll examine how Jamaica, through sheer resilience and reform, is proving that there's more than one path to building a strong economy. Because sometimes, the tortoise really does beat the hare. If this story opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts on Guyana's oil boom and Jamaica's steady path. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Because the Caribbean's economic story is just getting started, and you're going to want to be here for every chapter.